good afternoon. 2 to go. Saving the best to almost last, maybe, we'll see. But this is Robin. Robin and I have spoken a few times, but this is the first time we've actually spoken face-to-face. I'm a big fan of what Robin does, because he also heavily uses analytical methodologies and techniques, which, as you know, I'm a big fan of. And he's also using predictive elements for us to be able to do our jobs and stuff. So apparently there's an intro here that says, Robin is the red team lead. Nice. At HelloFresh Global. With extensive experience in CTI and threat-informed defense, Robin is inspired to bring in concepts of war and intelligence studies to the field of cybersecurity. Good for you. With a passion of staying ahead of the curve, he is committed to developing novel solutions to security problems. Sounds fascinating. Thanks, Robin.
Thank you for the introduction. I hope the mic is working. So, welcome, everyone. I'm pretty excited to be here, and I mean it when I say excited. If I'm like sweating, that's because of that. And sorry for the poor choice of font colors, but I have a website where you can find more extended content about what I'm going to talk today, and it is predictivedefense.io, and the defense with an S. So today, we are mainly going to talk about how to predict cyber attacks, which sounds kind of exciting, at least for me. So this is the program agenda. First, we will talk about what should we expect from predictions. And again, then quickly go over the predictive analysis techniques, which are useful. And then I will demonstrate 3 case studies for constructing early warning systems. So, as we are all familiar with, in the CTI field and as well as in the cybersecurity, most of the focus is on the post-breach indicators. So, there are like multiple products like TTPs, IOAs, IOCs. But what I realized was the preparatory stages of a cyber attack was actually like understudied. There were like some initiatives from MITRE like pre-attack. Although I see there are like lots more opportunities to explore that area. So, but what are we actually trying to solve here? So, you may have heard from the data breach investigations report or like any other source that time from initial access to a full breach or ransomware is getting shorter and shorter, and time to weaponize vulnerabilities is also very short now. So when we put our focus on post-compromise indicators, like we do it for a good reason, obviously, but within this like shrinking time frames, the reaction gets actually a bit delayed. So this leads to like a prolonged dwell time and could lead to significant damage. And also, this is not only like from a technical or operational aspect, but as well as a strategic aspect. As you may have experienced in organizations, the time it needs to implement a security control at scale is actually like several months usually, especially if it requires like collaboration between non-security teams, right? So if an organization like looks at the report and say, okay, like the exploitation of edge devices is a thing now, like let's do something about it, it's already too late, right? It's already like rampant. And 3, this is something I'm like most commonly experiencing with vulnerability management. So within vulnerability management, as you know, there are a lot of CVs coming out every day. And even if you scope them down based on your assets, tech stack, as well as impact, there are still a lot of things to work with. And this is not only for vulnerabilities, but pretty much with everything. So a time-sensitive approach can be like another consideration for better prioritization of the threats. So this is what we are going to try to achieve. So what is the end state we want to reach? So I want to like differentiate the terms because I titled the presentation like predictive defense to make a better definition. So from an intelligence perspective, so if there is a campaign that is already started and we are feeding our systems with the indicators of compromise, that is a bit of like a reactive approach considering the kill chain. That may be proactive because it hasn't maybe reached your perimeters yet, but still when you look at the kill chain, it is like later stages in the attack. So the reactive approach may look like, okay, there is an ongoing campaign, and let's take these IOCs and put it in our like preventative system. So the main strategy here is prevention. And more proactive approach in the context of CTI could be like profiling a threat actor, getting to know about their like TTPs and everything, and say, okay, there is an actor known to target our industry vertical or geography, and these are the TTPs. So we don't know if there are like any ongoing campaigns, but let's get prepared. Let's build some detections. So when it's attacked, it may target actually us. So how does predictive defense differentiate? So predictive defense essentially says that there is an increased probability of a certain attack occurring within a certain time period. So two things the predictive approach mentions is that there is a probability. So when you talk about like post-compromise things, the probability is usually like 100%. If you see it, there is definitely a breach. But in this case, we will be talking more about like probabilities of a breach, or likelihood of a breach. And then the second thing is mentioning of a time period. So as I mentioned before, this is like a time-sensitive approach. So there are a lot of techniques that can be used, which can be like very generically grouped into two sections. First is structured analytical techniques. These are particularly useful for building strategic foresight. And the second approach is statistical techniques, which includes machine learning and deep learning. Now, when you research about like predicting or anticipating cyber attacks, a lot of work is attributed to like deep learning, machine learning. So AI is a huge thing now, right? And there are like a lot of questions like, can AI predict cyber attacks? And the answer is, like it is not the, it is certainly a useful tool, but it is only like one of the tools. And it is not the cure for every problem we have, basically. So, excuse me. So, the case studies we are gonna demonstrate today is mainly based on statistical approaches. So, has anyone heard of an early warning intelligence as a concept? This is a concept which I believe like historically came from World War II period. So the idea is that there are like certain steps building up to an like attack, and if we can like observe, if we manage to observe those steps, we can get extra time to like prepare. So. Again, to compare, differentiate, to see how it differentiates with other intelligence products, let's take IOCs for example. So IOCs are known malicious indicators. This could be IPs, host names, and whatnot. And the strategy is to prevent the execution of these malicious activities. So this approach is highly accurate because you are extracting these artifacts from the intrusions themselves. So it can be said that this is like a high precision intelligence product. But because every IOC is pointing to a single instance, it is a low coverage type of intel product. Like one IOC can only point to a single event. And if you look at the time frame, IOC is like placed somewhere here. Like during an attack and through the like maybe later stages. So when we talk about TTPs instead, these are behavioral patterns of attacks and known malicious activities. So the strategy is more focused on detections with this one. And this method is like more flexible because now we are not pointing to a single instance, a specific instance of an attack, but a group of attacks. So like an example could be like detecting malware. So if you use IOCs, you can only detect a single variant, most probably. But if you use a TTP, you have a better coverage of a certain malware family. So it can be said that the precision is like a medium because there is still like room for false positive. It generates more false positive generally, but the coverage is better than IOCs. And what about early warnings? So early warnings is essentially monitoring precursor events or preparatory events that could lead to some malicious activity. So the strategy is to identify some attack during its development stage. And because of that, you are essentially like pointing to something that doesn't exist yet. So for that reason, the false positive ratio would be like much higher. So precision would be essentially low. But what we gain in exchange of this is time. So if we can keep the number of warnings or number of false positive to a certain level, we may actually tolerate the high false positive ratio because the warning we will get will be here before an attack. So that will give us more time to prepare, more time to do research, and this is like basically a trade-off between precision and extra response time. So every research starts with research questions. So some research question examples could be like, how can I detect upcoming spear phishing campaigns? Or how can I identify vulnerabilities that are most likely to be exploited? And as with every research question, these can be further refined. So refinement is necessary to put a specific focus and scope to our research. So instead of saying, how can I detect the upcoming spear phishing, I can say, are there any early signs of a spear phishing campaign that I can observe? So this is a bit more narrower focus that helps guiding our research. Or instead of saying, how can I identify the vulnerabilities with the most likelihood of exploited in the wild, we can say what properties of a vulnerability makes it more likely to be adopted by the adversary. You can even scope this even further by selecting a specific type of adversaries, let's say ransomware actors. So our process looks like this. It has 5 steps. So the first step is the build a predictive model of some type of attack vector. Then every model should have a corresponding action plan. So because with this approach, we don't get 100% certainty because measuring or observing intent is near impossible. But we will get probabilities 70%, 40%, 60%. So it is a must to prepare in advance the steps that can be taken at each level of probability. So this requires a layered approach of responding. And then we start monitoring by using our collection sources. We can set up the systems either automated way or manually. Then when we observe the events we are expecting to happening, we can act on the response plan we have, then revise our model or our response plan based on the learnings. So this is the cycle. The modeling, preparation, monitoring, acting, and revise. So the research approaches we can use to build an early warning system. So I'm calling these research approaches because there are a lot of assumptions in building each of these, and it requires a lot of trial and error, essentially, which we will dive in with the case studies. So, but there are you can say there are 3 research approaches. One is a profile-driven research, which means that you profile certain attack types or certain activity clusters to try to find patterns. And if you can find these patterns, you can use it to predict future attacks. One very popular example of this is what is called C2 hunting, or adversary infrastructure tracking. So second is exploratory research approach. So this is basically you collect data from multiple sources and try to see if there are any correlations between them without assuming anything or without necessarily profiling anything. So if you happen to find any correlation, you then try to investigate what you have found. And if there is an insight from that, you can then use that. Then 3 is a hypothesis-driven research. So you make a hypothesis about how a certain type of attack happens. Then you collect and analyze data to try to confirm or refute your hypothesis. If you can confirm, very good, you can now use it. If not, then you need to start over. So let's look at our case studies. So first one is the info-stealer infections. So info-stealers are known to be spreaded mainly by mail spams or malvertisement. So what does a typical mail spam look like? So the adversary needs to set up a command and control or other infrastructure where they're gonna host their malware and whatnot. Then they need to build their malware strain of their choice and build a dropper. And then they need to distribute this, actually. So they have several options. They will either send emails, spam emails. For that, they will need an email server and malware host. And if they're gonna put up ads, they will need to use advertising platforms. Or they may just Trojanize an application and distribute it through torrent-like websites. So After listing these steps, we ask ourselves what could be some early signs for this type of attack. So with this case, we will follow a hypothesis-driven approach. So our hypothesis is that mal spam is an indiscriminate attack. So profiling them will be like very hard actually, because you will see like lots of variety of things, a variety of distribution methods and infrastructure. But what we can assume is that the mal spam attacks will come in waves. So if there is a way that we can like observe these waves of like surging malware activity, then maybe we can use it to like identify these early on and like use it as a early warning system. So Malware Bazaar is an open source platform which you can like, inquire malware intelligence, and it provides the number of submitted malware samples of a certain families. It has also like tags and everything you can use. So I'm going to try to get this data and analyze it and compare it with the known infostealer infections in our environment to see if I can find any correlation. So collection is easy, but modeling is harder, because when you like inquire the API, by the way, I collected data for Redline, VDAR, and Raccoon stealers. So this is like the data of daily number of submissions for these malware families combined. And you see there is like it looks like a noise basically. So there are certain like spikes you can see, but for modeling this needs to be like further processed. So what I did was I took a moving average of with a 5-day window. So I took the average of submissions for 5-day windows and like moved that window, which essentially like smoothed out the graphic a little bit. So this looks certainly better. And then I put on top of this the moving average of 15 days. So my assumption was that if the average of the last 5 days was certainly like considerably higher than the average of the last 15 days, it could mean that a lot of samples were submitted in the last 5 days. So it could actually indicate a tick in the activity. So then what I did next was I took the I looked at the confirmed infection cases, and I went to the infostealer logs, and maybe in these logs there is actually a timestamp where this log was taken. So I could find I believe about 40 instances of this. I took the timestamps there and I put them on the graph to see if there is any correlation or whatnot. So what I can see is on a rough look, I can see that when the red line is above the yellow area, the infections were more likely based on the data I have, and this data is from 2023 to 2024. So I tried to model based on this activity. This scratch areas you will see is a prototype of an early warning system. So if the scratch areas cover most of the infections, then I could there could be something I can work with. So, but I needed to specify some ranges because the heuristics say, okay, the red line should be above the yellow area, but how much above? So I experimented with different ranges, and for the data I have, the range I found is 10 and -20. So it means basically if the red line is greater by 10 or above than the yellow area, or 20 below. So it would be looking for really sharp rises and falls. So I could see visually, I got actually a pretty good coverage. Then I tested it with the previous year's data as well, so 2022, and wanted to see if this model works with the previous year as well, and I got not bad results. But then I needed to look actually how good are the results and what is the false positive rate and whatnot. So this is the simplified model. So the red ones are the warnings generated, and the black ones are the intrusion timestamps. So for the period of 2 years, what I found is the system, the model based on these ranges and everything generated 30 alerts in total of 2 years. The precision was like actually very low, like 40% of them were like true positives, 60% false positives, but the coverage of the infections was like 88%, so it covered most of the attacks we saw in our environment. And the false positive rate is very high, but when you look at it, it in the total generates like 30 alerts over the period of 2 years. So this could mean that maybe this level of false positive is somewhat tolerable when you look at the total number of alerts. Then the question comes how to decide the signal lifetime. So when a warning is generated, after how many days I should consider it expired? How many days should be valid? So what I did was I looked at I compared the infection data with the warnings, and I saw that 75% of the infections occurred within the first 9 days following of warnings generation. And then another 20% took place between like the 9th day and 17th days. So I used these like time frames as signal lifetime. So when a warning is generated, the first 9 days is like high risk area. Then after the 10th day, it is like a medium risk. And after the 18th day, we can say like the risk is relatively normal, as it used to be. So I now mapped these, ranges, time brackets with a layered response plan. This is like a totally example response plan, but the idea is that we have multiple probabilities here, right? Like 75%, 20%, and whatnot. So the idea is to think about what steps we can take corresponding with each probability. So in the high risk zone, we can like issue a warning, like company-wide warning to the employees, or we can maybe enhance our visibility, maybe enable or tweak some detection rules that will like usually generate like too many alerts, but for temporary time period. For the first 9 days, maybe we can tolerate that. Or we may enable more restricted access policies for a temporary period of time. Then after 9 days have passed, we may like initiate a threat hunting or like lift some of the controls we had temporarily enabled. And after the 18th day, we can, just do a follow-up communications. So the idea is to have this like layered approach of proactive response. And these steps are not reacting to a certain threat, like unless you identify it in your environment, obviously, but to like prepare or enhance our posture. Our second case is spear phishing attacks. So this is an example of a profiling approach, very similar to like CTU hunting. So I will not I won't go into too much detail. But essentially, when you think of a spear phishing attack, what an adversary needs to do is they need to curate a list of targets. It could be like employee emails or anything. They can use like multiple things for that. They can inquire the email service, identity service, or they can just do OSINT. And then they need to set up their infrastructure. If it's going to be like a infection, malware infection phishing, then they need to like set up a C2 host or malware host. Or if it's going to be like a credential phishing, they need a landing page for that. And they will certainly need domain names, SSL certificates, and whatnot. And then again, they need a distribution method for like mass emailing the employees. So now let's put our defender's hat for a second and think, how we can profile these spear phishing attacks from our side. So we can compile all the spear phishing instances we had, and we can try to find, like cluster them based on common properties. So we can actually ask some questions towards that data for analysis. We can say, okay, what is the mean time between two spear phishing attacks, or what is the distribution of any of these attacks throughout the year? Are there any seasonalities, or are they tied to a certain events? How many clusters are there? Because most of the phishings will be like basic spam, where there may be more targeted, more high impact, clusters elsewhere. Which malware families do I receive, and what do landing page looks like? So the last two questions is more about like how we can fingerprint the infrastructure, the sample, or the landing page itself. So this was one of the phishing campaigns I have investigated in the past. So this was like highly targeted and high impact campaign towards cryptocurrency businesses, which was later attributed to North Korea. And what I have seen is that the domain names used in the campaigns contained certain keywords because they were mimicking basically cloud storage platforms like Google Drive, CloudShare, whatnot. And all of the, that time, all of the C2 servers had 2 ports open as a like typical feature, 80 and 8080. And the reason behind that was they were using compromised web servers, and they didn't want to disrupt the main website, so they spun up their C2 at 8080 and left the, the application running on 80 by itself. And from our client's perspective, there were approximately 3 months between 2 attacks. So what is striking with this example is that these patterns have remained consistent for at least 2 years. So they were using the same keywords, they were using the same C2 configuration. So this could be used as a pattern to identify new infrastructure and raise warnings. So let's do an indications and warnings analysis. So this is basically looking at our options of what we can observe, which could indicate some future activity. So we can monitor for interrogation of our mail servers or identity services because we know that adversary needs like a target list and they may interact with our services for it. And then we can, using the profile information, we can scan the internet to spot new infrastructure. We can use the domain patterns, we can use the infrastructure patterns. And then we can also like inquire the IOC feeds to find the IOCs of this campaign and then try to pivot to find even more, maybe newer infrastructure. Then similar to the previous malware bazaar example, we can utilize this platform to monitor for malware family activities that are of interest. If this is especially useful if you are working with like high impact and targeted intrusions. And lastly, we can also utilize like OSINT or like other vendor reports. So to build an early warning system based on these insights, we need to do data analysis. So we need to extract a history of these signals retrospectively, then compare it with the incidents that we had in the past. So similar to the first example. So we can try with like different ways and combinations of these indicators we have talked about in the previous slide, and we can also use the mean time between 2 attacks as a signal lifetime. But sometimes the model is not good enough. It is important to verify with the data that we have internally from coming from CM, coming from EDRs or like incident response postmortem. And if it is not good enough, we will need to like start over. This is why this is essentially a research approach. So third and last example is about credential stuffing. So this will be an example of exploratory approach. So what I did was I basically collected data from multiple sources, both internal and external. So I looked at the dark web mentions of our company. I grabbed the WAF logs. I grabbed web exploit attempts, DDoS attacks, risky sign-ins from Azure. So I wanted to see if there were like any correlations between them. You can also run some like hypothesis. So you can say, okay, if the mentions of my company in dark web increases, does it mean that I'm more likely to like have cyber attacks? But in this case, I did not run any hypothesis, but just basically looked at the correlations between them. So let's take a step back. And again, from a kill chain perspective, think about what does a typical credential stuffing attack look like. By the way, my target here wasn't credential stuffing, but you will understand why I'm mentioning this. So the attacker first needs a username and password combo list. Then they need to test the rate limits of their target, if they have Cloudflare or whatnot. And then they would need to gather a live proxies list because these attacks are usually like distributed over like thousands of proxies. And then they launch their attacks, collect their credentials, and sell these in the cybercrime markets. So I collected the data from those sources, then I looked at the correlations in pairs of these data. So I looked at the correlation of info-stealer infections and dark web mentions. I looked at the info-stealer infections with coupon sales and DDoS and whatnot. So these numbers you see here are the outputs of Pearson's correlation coefficient. So I did this with the, by putting different time gaps between two data sets. So I shifted one data set forward in time. I was trying to basically discover, is this event from today, related to some event from 2 weeks ago, 1 week ago. Then I found something interesting. So there was like a moderate inverse correlation between info-stealer infections and DDoS attacks. So those seemed unrelated, right? So I wanted to dive in, even though the correlation was not that strong. It was interesting. And I visualized the data just to see, what it meant. So it basically said that between two info-stealer leaks, the likelihood of DDoS attacks were more likely. Then I did several things. I first looked at the WAF logs to see, the features of that DDoS. Then what I noticed was that some of the DDoS attacks classified by WAF was not actually DDoS attacks, but credential stuffing attacks. And because attackers were sending repetitive requests, it was classified as DDoS. So that was insight number one. And then I looked at the contents of these info-stealer leaks. They were just regular leaks, like any other info-stealer leak, nothing special. But then I started to research about how these credential stuffing people work. Then I learned that, naturally, coming to the previous slide, first step, they need a username and password combo list. And once they use this combo list, their combo list would expire for that specific target. So they needed a way to update that. And one way they did that was to use publicly available breach data. So it could be breach databases or info-stealer leaks in this case. So this could be the underlying reason why I'm observing this moderate correlation. So now I'm forming a hypothesis. I'm saying that if there is a new info-stealer leak or data breach that contains credentials of our customers or our employees, it is likely that some credential stuffing attacker will grab that and update their list. Then after some time, they will just launch a new attack. So I will base on my model based on this insight. So if accounts belonging to our organization is available on publicly available sources, then there is a 40% probability that a credential stuffing attack will occur within 2 weeks. So again, putting it on the timeline, indications and warnings. So we can identify and monitor sources for info-stealer logs and public breaches. Then we need to parse that data to extract the ones that are belonging to our customers. And when the count of them exceeds certain amount, then we can generate an alert. Then with this one, there would be basically two layers of response. So the first layers could be informing the DevOps teams for monitoring, spikes in the activity or preparing for that because it may load on their services and which may cause, And then we can temporarily tighten the web application firewall rules and rate limits. And after these 14 days have passed, then we can just resume our normal days of operation. So that was it. I think I'm on schedule. Thank you very much for listening.